OODAcast, informing your decisions with intelligence, analysis, and insight. Brought to you by the team at OODAloop.com.
Hi, I'm Matt Devost, and this is the OODAcast, and super excited to have Maxie Reynolds join us today for a discussion, who is the author of this book, The Art of the Attack. As many of you know, a topic that is near and dear to me, given my kind of 30-year pedigree in red teaming and doing a lot of the things that she talks about in the book. So, Maxie, thank you so much for joining. And to start, could you kind of give us your background as to, how your career started and what you've done to date?
Thank you for having me, obviously. I got here in a little bit of a different way than most people, I think. So I actually started off working offshore oil and gas in my late teens, and I'd done that for about a decade. So I sort of grew up on oil rigs, and with what we call roughnecks, and it was a good time. But when I'd gone to work offshore, I was simply looking for a job where I could travel. In Scotland, the mean salary, at least where I was from, was sort of exchange rate maybe $15,000 per year. And here was this job where you could travel sort of for free. There was a time component or a temporal component, but essentially it was you got paid to do it. And so, I think the day rate back then, I was a 19-year-old making $14,000 a month. So it was a whole new world. And I saved that money for a long time. I think I probably still got some if I went and looked at my old bank account. So it was just like a way to travel. And then when you work offshore, you kind of have like a month on, a month off. And when you're on your month on, when you're trapped on that rig or that vessel, well, you end up with a lot of free time. You do 12-hour shifts, but there's not always something to do, every minute of that shift. So I'd gone to the Open University and I'd started to rack up some long distance degrees. And one of those degrees was computer science. And so I'd worked offshore for about 10 years. I had these degrees and I was looking for something new to do. I'd tried different things. I live in Los Angeles and I, have had a base here for probably 15 years now. And at some point I was doing like stunt work and I was, other sort of industry related things, but I needed an actual job. I was, approaching 30 and I needed an actual job. So I went down, I ended up working for PwC thanks to the computer science degree. And I got on their cybersecurity graduate team. But of course I was 10 years older than everybody else. And that, there was good and bad in that. And that was how I entered it. They offered me at the time, I remember they offered me pen testing or threat hunting. And my mind is probably much better suited to like threat hunting, to that side of things. But I couldn't have the anxiety of not finding something. I was like, no, I can do it. And so I went into pen testing, which I don't think that was the right way to make the decision, but the decision was made. And then, from there, I got into red teaming, social engineering, and then, sort of nearly 4 years ago now, I kind of left it behind, and I went into basically like the intersection of those two last industries of mine, like where they intersect. I sort of came out. So I'd worked offshore, putting things underwater for 10 years or inspecting things underwater for 10 years. And then I had this red team and social engineering background where we were breaking into different places. And one of them was actually a data center. And I remember it being a really big deal that we'd got in. Like they really didn't expect it. Not the way every company is like, oh, you'll never get in here, but like it was military, and it had sort of military data involved. And so it was a huge deal that we got in. And I thought, well, if you want to keep them that safe, put them underwater. And so I started this company about 4 years ago. And basically, we are a company that puts data centers underwater in a modular fashion. And so, yeah, I talked for a long time there. Do you have
Yeah, no,
questions?
that's perfect. Yeah, with regards to the data centers, do you have
Yeah.
some data centers that are in operation, or is it still in kind
Yeah.
of the engineering phase?
No, we do. So It's a little bit of both, really. I mean, we have some in operation and we have military that we don't see or hear from that were simply sold, friendly military, obviously.
Hmm.
But um, like we're sort of now reaching that inflection point where it's becoming more commercially viable, and it's thanks to a few things. It's just the longevity of the company. When we first tried to come to market, people were like, "No, we don't care," and this is like got to be. This is so novel, and no, we're not going to take it seriously, sort of thing. And then that starts to change just over time, networking, going to the industry events, getting some of the big companies that we all know and that we've all heard of, getting those companies to do like POCs and things like that. Then they started to go, oh, okay, yeah, there's value in this. They didn't see the full value, but they started to at least gear themselves towards the fact that there could be. And then I guess the other thing that happened is the Chinese built underwater data centers. And so America was like, oh, wait a minute. And so that was actually good for us. And I guess one other thing that has happened that's sort of taken us to that like commercial inflection point, where the trajectory is definitely uh, up, is OpenAI. OpenAI changed a lot for us when it came to market. It was like people then had to take our cooling mechanism, which is probably too down in the weeds for this, but basically how we cooled, they had to take it seriously because it became the only viable way to run GPUs in a way that is both sustainable, which is one thing, and it's tertiary to most companies, but also in a way that was practical and doable. And so, yeah, that kind of that shifted a lot for us for sure.
That's fascinating. We'll have to talk about getting you on the agenda for OODAcon, which is our annual conference where we talk about all these disruptive technologies, because we had data centers in space a couple of years ago, but
Yeah.
underwater seems much more feasible. Uh,
Underwater is more feasible. You know the thing about space, it's much easier to put things into space than it is underwater. Like by far.
oh wow.
And even things like we're starting to now grow tissues in space because
Mhm.
there's just nothing to like squash them down. So it's hard to get them up there. It is not hard to keep them there, as you can see from like
Yeah.
satellite. If you looked at the satellite things recently, like
Yeah.
the LEO satellites, dear God, there's a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
There's a
No,
lot going on. Yeah.
yeah, I have an investment in a company called Turian Space. So,
Yeah.
one of the things they do is pull up the dashboard of all of the satellites orbiting the Earth. And I'm always amazed at how crowded it is, but then also how far apart they are. Because it looks super crowded, but in reality, they're, tens of kilometers, at a minimum
Yes.
away from each other,
Totally.
which is kind of
Yeah, yeah,
interesting.
yeah. We're not evolved to like for spatial reasoning at large scale. We're
Yeah.
not even evolved to understand what like $20 billion is. It's like how many millions are in a billion? Like we're not. It doesn't make
Yeah.
sense. It doesn't compute easily. You have to learn it.
Yeah.
But I think Bellingcat has like a satellite where you can like borrow it for OSINT work, I
Mhm.
think, which is like quite cool. And I don't know if there are other companies that do that, but
Yeah,
um,
no,
I like that
fascinating.
idea.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah,
definitely have to pull on that thread. October
yeah,
29th, I have to check your calendar, see if you want to come out and chat about that because we deal with a lot of exponential technology. And we do talk
yes.
about the fact that the human brain is not wired to accept exponentials. We
No,
just don't
it really
understand.
isn't.
We don't understand what it means. We understand what it means in very small contexts, but as it
Yeah,
starts to, we call it get on the back half of the chessboard, then we really
yeah,
aren't able to comprehend it.
right.
So fascinating. But what led you to write the book? Kind of what was your thesis going into it that you wanted to put this approach, in
Yeah.
perspective on paper, along with these stories that make it kind of compelling and interesting?
So I like to suffer. I'm fairly self-masochistic, so it was I guess I would, if I could jump back before saying that, that is true, but have always thought if you can do something, you should do it. If you have the potential to do it, if you have the capability to do it, why are you not doing that? And so I'd been red teaming and social engineering, and I was like, all we were talking about internally in one of the companies I worked for was this attacker mindset. And I was thinking, yeah, okay, I understand it intrinsically and sort of essentially, but has someone put this into words? And then I went out and I was kind of looking for information on that, just to try and adjust my viewpoint. Because I think sometimes when you're relying on your own thoughts and you're in that just one man echo chamber, it's like, am I right though? Am I like, can I have some backup on this? And where else to go for backup but the internet? And yeah, I started to look and there was nothing. And so I went to my boss at the time and said, like, what do you think about this concept? And he was like, damn it, I wish I'd thought of that sort of thing. And I was like, oh, I like that. And so then I got walked into Wiley, and they also liked the sort of idea and saw that there was maybe a gap in the market there. And they gave me 8 weeks to write the book,
Oh my
hence
gosh.
the suffering.
Wow.
And so, yeah, and so I was like, I can do that. And that turned into, that was, I think I probably had maybe a stroke or at least half a stroke within there. Like it was really difficult because it's not just one thing. And there was no chat GPT at the time. There was no like, can you just check this? Like for grammar or for like, you adjust the wording so I'm not being repetitive or redundant, so on and so forth. So yeah, it was hard work. And I guess the other thing I would say before I know where you're going with this, so you're going to ask me questions about it. I've not read it in 4 years. I've not read it since I closed my computer lid to that day, and they're like, it's going to publishing. And I was like, great. So this should be fun.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
haven't read it, but you lived it, right? So,
Yes, I did.
as
I
like
did.
riding a bicycle. How would you define, for people that might be new to the concept, how would you define the attacker mindset? What do you mean when you say that?
I mean, the the core idea of it is to be an attacker, you have to think like one. So then how do you think like one? And it's kind of, it's not, I guess reductively, it's like you can't take anything for granted. So you have to find different uses for things, different uses for information, different uses for the way a building's laid out. So one of like the most interesting things about just the whole domain for me was how you look at things. So perception is essentially everything. And I would just love to go off on another tangent here. Um, Basically, I've always stayed away. You and I are both avid readers, and I stay away from self-help books like the plague. Like I just don't enjoy them. I don't enjoy the pop psychology. I don't want the help, I guess. But when I think of this book, sometimes I'm thinking it's kind of almost like a self-help book in that it's almost promotes like stoicism in a way. There's a lot of parallels there. So it's like stoicism is you need to, the way you perceive is everything, and then you have to have that, you have to act on that perception in a way that is, conducive, beneficial to what you're trying to achieve. And then you have to have the will to keep going. And that's very, very similar to some of the themes in Art of the Attack. It's like nothing's good or bad. It's just how you perceive it. You get stopped as you're going into someplace. That's not necessarily bad. Now you have an opportunity to do even better work, to get past that security guard or whoever it is that's stopping you, or the lock that you can't pick. Like it's an opportunity and you have to be persistent. So I guess those were the sorts of things that I cared about. And then other things that I found very interesting and I think are helpful in terms of thinking like an attacker was back to how you view things. And it's like architecture is an opportunity. So the design of buildings, the way architects can't really foresee how we're going to get through the walls, the ceilings, the vents. The architect made this obviously flat walls. They're typically flat, and I can put a garbage, like what do you call them? The big
Dumpster.
garbage dumpster, a
Yeah.
big dumpster up, drill a hole through your wall and climb in. I've gone in through the dumpster and then I've gone in through the wall. And from the outside, like there's just no way to see that. Nobody's really planning that. So then do you strengthen the walls? Maybe, but that's a big undertaking. It's expensive. So what are the other ways to get around that? And the other things, it's like I still find myself doing it if I'm driving the 405 or the 101 in Los Angeles. And I think, okay, if I had to rob one of these banks, which one? And it's generally going to be the one closest to the 405 or the 101. there's a lot of treating the city as a puzzle. This urban design becomes this puzzle to be solved. Well, how would I get from here to here? And in Los Angeles, of course, we're mainly policed from the sky because we're a huge sprawl. In New York, we're mainly policed from the streets because there's a sort of artificial canyons there.
Mm.
So it becomes different in the city, and it becomes different in the office. It becomes different depending on the layout and of the offices, which you can kind of see from the outside of the building because you can find the exit signs and things like that. And so I liked that part of it. I liked the puzzle of it
Mm.
all. And I kind of tried to set that up in the book for readers to also be interested in.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a different framing, right? You mean it makes me think of kind of like the thief's guide to the city, right? Or I find myself
Yes.
even when I'm
Yeah.
traveling, like the parking spot I select at the hotel,
Yeah.
is the furthest away from an egress for somebody that wants to rob my car, right? You
Yes.
start to think through all these things.
Yeah.
Um, and there's huge value. I mean, I've done it over the course of my career. With regards to, training U.S. Special Forces to think like a terrorist, or, Nate Fick described it as turning the map when he wrote his article for Harvard Business Review, where it's kind of like, okay, I'm on the military battlefield and I know how I see myself and I know how I see the
Yeah.
adversary, but if I flip the map, how do they see me,
See
right? So
me.
that
Yeah.
act of self-reflection from the
Yes.
opposing viewpoint is super fascinating.
Oh, absolutely. The self-awareness that's required to be red team and social engineering, they're not the same, of course. I think social engineering is a sort of subset of red teaming, but for both disciplines, let's say, um, self-awareness is sort of the utmost importance because you can't, it's the precursor to all of it, right? It's you can't remember to perceive things in a way. You get caught in a building, let's say, you can't,
Mm,
it's very difficult to tell your body when your heart's beating really fast and you're starting to sweat and you're going red, to say to your body, don't do that. This is an opportunity for growth here. This is a way to prove you're even better at your job.
mm,
It's really difficult to do that. But once you have the self-awareness, the precursor to go, these are opportunities, and you start to gear your brain to see them that way, it becomes second nature. And so you
mm.
grow into the job. But yeah, you couldn't do it without self-awareness. And I think one of the things that I was fortunate to learn just in my like very early teens was, oh, how people perceive me is nothing like uh who I think I am. And I
Mm.
still find that today, I'm talking about my background and people say, no, you worked on oil rigs. I'm like, yeah, I don't look like I should have worked on an oil rig. That's your perception. It's absolutely not
Mhm.
even close. I'm a beacher working ready. But
Mhm.
it's so I understand there's a gap between who you think I am, but there's also a gap between who you think I am and who I think you think I am. And
Mhm.
so it's sort of, yeah, I think in the book, someplace there is like this framing for that. It's like what you know that no one else knows, what you know that other people know, what you know that like, no, that they don't know, and what they know that you don't know. And it's interesting.
Yeah,
It's an interesting
that's
psychological exercise to go through.
yeah. I
Yeah.
subjected Jim Miller, the former Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, and Congressman Will Hurd to that at the
Oh,
last OODAcon, where I asked them,
okay.
what does the adversary know about us that we don't recognize about
That's a good
ourselves? And
stuff.
that's like
Yeah.
a super interesting framing of it.
What did they say?
One thing that I did appreciate, right, when you talk about red teaming or you talk about attacker mindset, particularly in the cybersecurity field, it tends to be very technically focused,
Yeah.
and your book seems to bring a real kind of balance to the force and also focus on kind of the psychological angle.
Yeah.
So can you explain, beyond the exploits on the wire, what
Hmm.
are some of the like psychological traits that people exhibit that you're able to exploit as a red teamer?
I think probably like it's yeah, part of the human condition is wanting to be helpful. Even least helpful people are still like, oh, I'll do it most of the time. So I think kind of that's quite easy to exploit. Ask for help. Most often you'll be given it. And we teach that to our children, right? We say like if you're out and you're lost, then go to whatever it is. I don't know. I don't have children, but like, go to the nearest,
Find a mom. We always told our
yeah,
kids to
find a
find
mum.
find find a mom with a kid, right?
Yeah, I was going to be like, go to the nearest pub, find someone drunk. No, yeah, find a mum. Exactly. So things like that, we teach that, and it's sort of it is either it's already innate and we're just putting it into words for them, or we're taught this generation to generation, maybe some blend of both. And that carries through to the workforce. People want to be helpful. I think that's probably the easiest and most pervasive thing. Um, it's yeah, or ubiquitous. And so I I don't feel bad doing it either. Um, you can't have a conscience doing that. That your job is to get the job done. The you right your wrongs after by writing the report and saying this is how you should strengthen your environment. And so yeah, helpfulness I think is the key thing to
So
prey upon.
people want to be helpful. Do you think it by their nature they want to be helpful out of kindness, or is it a mixture of they want to be helpful out of kindness, but also helpful out of fear of consequence, that if they're not helpful, that there'll be some sort of like negative incentive for them?
I think it's probably a blend of those two and just social normalization. Hold the door open for the pregnant lady coming in, even if you can't be bothered, even if she's a few paces back. And we've all rolled our eyes as someone's walking too slowly because we're holding the door, but you hold the door. So it's a little bit, I think, almost like helpful inculcation. There's there's obviously something within most of us, but then there's this overlay of this is what I should do. And I fell victim to it. And I often think as I'm doing things, you could be socially engineer me, but what would you stand to gain? I'm okay with it. Like yeah, I think people are mainly just helpful, and it almost doesn't matter why they're helpful, just that they are, and that
Mm.
you'll find most places if you ask for help, you will be given it. It might not be the exact help you need. I've asked for help to get into banks headquarters before and being told no, but here's what you could do, and I go and do that. So yeah, you just have to ask.
Helpful, and also is it useful to be relatable? I know the old school social engineers used to spend a lot of time just developing a relationship, right? Where they would make
Yeah,
pretend that they had children that played soccer, and that they, then a month later when they call and are running late to the kids' soccer game, they've built that kind of relatability and they've built that element of trust. So do you think that being relatable plays a role in that, kind of being a
yes.
exploit is the right term, but I don't want to call it exploiting because that sounds cruel, and I know we're not trying to be
Yeah.
cruel, but how does relatability factor into the equation here?
I think of it a little bit differently. So I think you have to have layers to the pretext, and what you're describing is essentially a pretext. So it has to be so layered that you can answer 10 questions deep. And so it doesn't have to be relatable. I think that's one sort of
Hmm.
coloring of it, or one way to do it. I typically don't like to do that. So if I was building sort of rapport with someone and I was going to say that I had kids that went to soccer, eventually I forget I had children, had children. So what I would more likely do is build up rapport with them through questions like, "Oh, I'm interested about you because," and I do this naturally, just as I'm trying to make friends. I want to know about you, and most people want to talk about themselves. And I actually, contrary to what this podcast will say about me, don't love talking about myself. I want to find out more about you, and then it becomes sort of analytical for me, and I not in a judgmental way, just in a I'm trying to put you into a box. I'm trying to piece you together, and so I'll do that also on a red team in our social engineering engagement. It's like, okay, tell me about you, and then now I have information, and you think I'm interested in you, and to an extent I am, but I'm really actually going to use this to quietly exploit you.
Hmm.
So I would do it that way, but the and the relatability. I think I've seen that in action a lot, and it does work, and it's probably a quicker way to do it. But again, I might forget my lies. Like, oh, how many kids do you have? And I'll be like, I don't have
Mhm.
kids. And then
17.
the receptionist is like, okay, well, because you showed me a photo of them. I'm like, yeah, yeah,
Fascinating. Do let the tables get turned every once in a while, but not for this session. So, if you can come
yeah,
up with a unique angle, have had guests of the podcast actually flip around and interview me to talk about something that they wanted to pull the threads on.
yeah.
Um, can you give an example of a fairly like a real world story that had a fairly deep pretext where you kind of had to go down the rabbit hole a bit in order to be successful?
A good one. Um, so civilian work for a US entity, and there's actually two good ones, and now they're conflicting and competing for space in my head. Um, so let me go with the Ellie one. I was going out to dinner with my uh, then partner, and I got a call saying like, "You're up." And I was like, God damn it, I'm going to be a few hours. I might be late to dinner. And he's like, we're going to dinner with friends. And I was like, you're going to hold down the fort here because I have a job to do. And I was quite excited about it. And what it was to get into the home of a like crypto criminal. This must have been probably like four to
Wow.
5 years ago. Get in this house, and get his Wi-Fi password from him. And it was very long. I understand why this was easier than any other method that they maybe could have chosen. So I had to get into the building first, which was quite difficult. It was an apartment building, but it was fairly well like secured. So I had to follow a car into the garage, and then finally make my way to sort of his apartment. It was a large apartment complex, and sneak up the stairs by his house, take my shoes off, leave them at the top, make a little bit of noise coming down the stairs, tap on his door and say, hey, I'm just Airbnb in this, which I found out that there was an Airbnb in one of those apartments above. And so that made sense. And then I was like, I can't go into the Wi-Fi and I don't have any data and so on and so forth, like sort of a damsel in distress. And he's at the door with the door closed, and I just kind of, like what, like, do you mind sort of thing. I got in, and then he was very, very interested. Of course, he's like, so why are you here? And you have to have all those things. So why are you here? Well, how long are you here from? What are you going to do? And those are kind of easy to make up. I'm more or less from Los Angeles, so I was able to think of them, but I was also had some level of that
Mm.
already planned. And then just things like, the base things about yourself. And I can't remember. There was a question he asked me, and I wasn't prepared for it, and I kind of stumbled. And whatever it was, I ended up um, planning a dinner date with him that night. And so I was like, yeah, of course, no, I'll come back. I'll come straight back. I've just got to unpack and so on and so forth. And I was thinking, how did you not think of that? But yeah, so it was deep in that I had to be prepared in terms of everything. Why do you go on vacation? It seems really easy, but people ask you questions that you're sort of not expecting. So you have to be 10
Mm.
layers deep. And it was a long time ago, so I can't remember all of the details now. I do remember getting a Wi-Fi password and having to stay for about an hour and a half afterwards just to, shoot the breeze and then be like, okay, well, it's actually time for me to go back upstairs. And I remember when I was walking out, he's like, where are your keys? Because I didn't have anything in my hands other than my phone.
Mm.
And I was like, I didn't lock the door. I left it on the latch. And it's just like the quick thinking, and you're hoping that your face doesn't go red
Mm.
because we're not evolved to be perfect. I do not know why nature has kept that for us, where other human beings can tell if we are lying
Mm.
or embarrassed, but every so often my face will just flush. I'm
Mm.
like, what's the kid there? I left the door. Do you not do that in this building? This building not safe? Like, kind of turn it a little bit.
Mm.
Yeah, that
Wow.
was, yeah.
So that was
Um,
in support of a investigation type
it
activity.
was,
Yeah.
yeah, and a similar one. I'll try to be a lot more succinct with it. I went down to Texas over the holidays one year, and got put in an office where there was some laundering and other illegal activities going on, with mainly the security. And my job was to kind of um, speak to them on it. There was specific information. And my pretext there was, I'm a newly divorced single mother. Kids are with the dad this year. So I'm in and I'm working. Yeah, I'm the only person here, but that was why. And I think and these were obviously, generally speaking, they were men. I don't think there were any women on that staff. And that still hits no matter what you're doing, no matter if you're, really far into illegal activities, most people, unless you're a psychopath, you tend to have empathy for other people. So it was like a quick way to build sort of rapport with them. It was a quick way for them to go, oh, like that's a shame. You must miss your children. Let's bring you coffee and stuff like that. So it was a good way sort of in there. So I picked that pretext very, very carefully, and that was very detailed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fascinating. Um, Do you have any techniques that you use to communicate the results of the red teaming that you're doing to the leadership that you're performing the work for? I know it's always a challenge that people might view it as adversarial, or maybe you made
Yeah.
people feel stupid. Like there's a lot of things that get thrown in
Yeah.
your face as a red teamer. So what
Yeah.
were your strategies for communicating the results of the red team to make sure that they were well received?
Yeah, so I'm very matter of fact in my writings and reports. So I kind of, I would never say anything. The closest I got was we'd gone into pharmaceutical, um, like headquarter area, and there was an old man, and he was retired from it, but he was sort of doing part-time work, like one day a week, just to keep himself, I guess, socializing and sharp, maybe. And I just felt really bad. Like that one, got through the defenses. And I remember writing in the report, sort of, you know, that he was sort of, it was harmless. I didn't get so much information. I kind of tried to stick up for him, and I remember thinking at the time, that's way off base for you. You wouldn't do that
Hmm.
if he was 20 years younger. So why are you doing it now, sort of thing. Um, so outside of that, I'm very matter of fact about it. And when I would deliver reports, like, you obviously have the report and then you walk through it generally on a few calls or in persons, I'd be very like amiable and try to be personable, and like any of us could fall for this. I
Hmm.
don't write those things in the report. The report is almost like reads as the ledger of what happened for me,
Hmm.
and then mitigation strategies. But when I go in, it's like I've fallen for these things before. I've clicked on links, or I let people into my own business now. I'm like, let me hold the door for you,
Hmm.
and I don't know them. So like, it happens to us all. But like, here's the things you can do. So I guess being matter of fact in the report, because I don't like to leave room for subtext.
Hmm.
And then in person, being a little more forgiving, being a little softer, and trying to explain it to them in ways that, make sense to them. I don't use technical jargon when I'm talking to them. I don't sort of placate either. It's just, hey, we're all human is the message in person, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, I
Interesting.
don't
Yeah.
know
So
if you
yeah,
have
the
a
kind of like a
strategy.
combination of like truth to power as one
Yeah.
element, but
Yeah.
then the empathy that this is kind of
Yeah.
a tool that is used to help improve your security. That's a strategy that I've used to make it
Yeah.
non-adversarial. It's
Well,
not a
and it's
pass, it's not a fail. Like, yes, you
yeah,
can interpret it as a failure,
exactly.
but really what you've done is you've engaged in an exercise that's going to make you
Yeah.
stronger. So it's a tool that
Yes.
you've utilized, and that seems to resonate with folks. But I'm also very similar in that I
Yeah.
talk about the kind of the truth to power
Yeah.
um, element, the kind of
Yeah.
candor to it, which has led to some fun experiences over
But
the
yeah,
years for
it
certain
often does.
briefing
It often
generals
does.
and CEOs and boards of directors
Yeah.
and things of that sort with messages that
Yeah.
they don't necessarily want to hear,
Yeah.
but that are essential that it gets delivered, kind of with that
I
candor.
so a couple of things that you said sort of provoke a response. So one, I like to give people things in stats and numbers. So it's like I like to say to them, I know this is hard for you, but you're probably one of 30% of all companies that are doing this. So you are ahead of the curve. Like, well done.
Hmm.
You didn't fail. Similar to you, this is an opportunity, much like we were talking about at the start, when you're failing as the red teamer or the business owner or the mother or the pet or whatever it is, you're feeling, you're like, okay, but I can grow from this. It's the same thing. And again, that's why I kind of started out by saying there's a level of like stoicism to this,
Hmm.
where it's like any discomfort used to grow or maneuver. So yes, and then you said something else. I'm having a blonde moment, so I cannot I cannot recall. But yeah, there you should be learning. I guess the other thing is I got it from Andy Grove's high output management, and it's along the lines of if you spend X amount of hours training your employees and they work X amount of hours for you themselves per year, and you do that for 20 employees, then multiply those numbers for a 1% improvement. That's incredible. You
Sure.
gain sort of an extra, let's say they work for you for an hour a year, then you gain like 1% of that. Great. Like it's worth something. And then multiply that across the workforce. You've now trained an entire workforce. And if there's a 1% improvement, a 10% improvement, it matters. And then the other thing is, of course, putting things into like ROI metrics
Hmm.
for C-levels. I find that enjoyable, and it's much easier to do now. It's much easier to go onto Chat GPT, like make it for fictional companies, but like, what is the ROI on this, and put that in. That is the language that they understand. And so, I guess a very long way to say this.
Hmm.
To answer your original question, it's like you should talk in their vernacular, jargon, whatever you want to call it. You shouldn't talk to them in yours. They don't
Yeah.
care, and they
Yeah.
shouldn't care. That is
This,
not their job.
yeah, speak their language for
Yeah.
certain. And they are running a business, right? I think a
Yes.
lot of people in the security profession in particular forget
Forget.
that they're actually trying to manage business risk, and cyber is just an element of business risk. And so you
Yes.
have to communicate in the context of the actual business they're trying to operate. So I think the biggest failures I've seen in executive briefings are people that are tone deaf to the actual
Yes.
business operations. They don't understand how the company makes money. They don't understand how they manage other
Yeah.
risks, and they can't put cyber in that context. And so it has less meaning for the executives.
Yeah, you could sort of see it on banks. So banks are like it's really difficult to do because we don't want a dollar coming out of our accounts that shouldn't, but we don't want to go to the checkout and not be able to pay. The balance in that as a bank, as a financial institution, is incredibly difficult.
Mhm.
And yeah, there's some, predictive analytics, and there's a lot that they can do, but it's not perfect. And so it's sort of like when we worked for banks, it was really hard to find the line. So hence why it goes back to like, matter of fact, here's how we got in, here's what you actually can do. And then when you go to talk to them, say, we understand the battle that you are internally fighting, and I don't think you'll ever get away from it. There's just no way for you to ever get away from it. But here's what you can do based on the threat landscape just now.
Sure.
And then like once you realize that, you're not going to make them a perfect organization, and also don't set them up to think that they can be or will be. It becomes a little bit easier to talk to them, I think.
Yeah. Excellent. You mentioned a couple of times, first at the beginning, you talked about the anxiety associated
Mhm.
with kind of being live in an operation, and then you
Yeah,
mentioned kind of the face flushing, when you were
yeah,
potentially caught in a lie. Are
yeah.
there any tools that you learned or taught yourself as you grew, in these engagements to help manage that stress going into it?
Um, I think so. A little bit, it was like a pre-mindset where it's enjoyable, it becomes enjoyable. And so then I don't get quite the level of anxiety that I would if if I was actually going to break into a bank. I would be a mess. Like I'd flush, I'd be clammy, I'm sure I'd puke. But because I know I've got this piece of paper that gets me out of it, that's one thing. That's helpful.
Hmm.
Like there are no real world repercussions because I'm actually a good guy.
Hmm.
Okay, so that's helpful. And then there's just like sheer enjoyment from doing it. I'm being paid to do this. Like there's that, but that doesn't help everyone because that doesn't mitigate all the nervousness. So what I like to do is sort of it's almost a meditation practice in that I when you're in a room, you can see like, quite far around. I can see to both my hands just now. I'm never focused on that. I'm always focused on what is directly in front of me. So what I learned to do was to walk in and go, okay, what can you see? Are the lights on? Where are the cameras? Like, and it wasn't because I
Hmm.
needed to know those things per se. I'd already, performed the precog, but it's like it gives your mind something else to do instead of being hyper focused on what's in front of
Hmm.
you. And I always found that quite helpful. And then just like, yeah, following the breath as people are talking to you, taking it in and not filling myself with anxiety. So it becomes basically where you put your attention. And so just not putting it on the anxiety. And probably the best thing that anyone can do is to recognize, oh, I'm nervous. I do that all the time before I
Hmm.
go on to a panel or, I was talking in front of 30,000 people in the O2 not so long ago. And I remember just about going on stage and going, fuck, I'm nervous. And then it's like, okay, good. Like, I'm not trying to hide it from myself. And I think for years, for a long time, I would have tried to, like, no, you're not, no, you're not, no, you're not.
No,
But
you have to accept
I'm
it. Yeah.
nervous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And that I think that's probably the first step.
Yeah.
It's like anxiety anonymous. Admit you have the problem, sort of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I definitely can relate to that. And I've been known to do, combat breathing before I go on stage and just things that from that perspective of biology help calm you down a little bit. But I've always treated it as almost a performance art as well, right?
Yes.
To relate back
Yes.
to as someone who is relatively introverted that joined a drama club in high school, I always tell myself,
Yeah.
well, this is just an extension of that, right? Like you're out
Yes.
here for a
Yeah,
performance.
and it's true.
And
I
then
there's Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, and then don't ask questions that you don't want to know the answer to in the moment. Because the first
Yeah.
time I went on TV, I asked, "Well, how many people, tune in or watch this show?" And they're like, "Oh,
No,
it's typically, 17 million or whatever they said." And then all of a
really.
sudden, my
Yeah.
leg just started thumping
Yeah.
against the table, and I couldn't stop it. Right? It was like before
Yeah.
I knew how many people,
Yeah.
I wasn't that nervous. But once I asked and I knew, then I was like, "Holy
Amazing.
crap, 17
Don't
million
tap.
people!"
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's like that. It's that is brutal. I went on Yahoo, I think, news to talk about my business, and I was like, "It's your business. You know it. It's fine."
Mhm.
I was You're outside for the intro, and she hit every point I thought to make, and I was like, well, "What am I going to talk about now?" And so here it comes. I'm like on screen, just like like this, and then my tongue got dry. So yeah, so like, and then I had to go. It's still your business. You still know
It's
it.
still yours,
Take a
yeah.
drink of water
Yeah. And
immediately
people want to hear it from you,
from
not
me.
the
Yes,
yes,
not
yeah,
from
the
them.
person.
Yeah.
There.
But
Um,
something you said is sort of interesting. There's a TED talk, and I think her name is Amy, and I'm sure people are going to be screaming like her second name at me. I just can't remember it. She done this TED talk where basically she talked about body language, and yes, how you're feeling affects that, but
mm,
what you do with it can also affect your internal like thought processes and feelings. So like putting the pencil between your teeth mimics a smile, things like that. So I found myself in a few situations going into the cubicles within these environments and standing like in like a like hands on head, like sort of
mm,
it's a position where your body starts to calm down, which calms your mind rather.
mhm.
So you can sort of do it both ways. And when I that was like that was earth shattering to me when I first heard that. I was like, I can affect my body. I can affect how I feel with my body language. It's not just a one-way track sort of thing.
Yeah,
That was sort of interesting. So yeah, yeah,
interesting. You mentioned also a couple of times ChatGPT. What
yeah.
role do you think technology like AI is going to start playing in this field?
Well, I think, currently AI is applicable holistically to about 12 to 15% of business, right? It's anything that's predictive, it can do, and it can generally do a little bit better and a little bit faster. In terms of like cybersecurity and I guess specifically this subset of cybersecurity, the whole point of AI to me is to be able to do things differently than we do them, and that is the attacker mindset, right? It's looking at things and being able to use those in a way they weren't intended. And I think AI has that capability. And so, an example, just outside of the security industry for a second, would be stop signs. I think they'll be eradicated because we shouldn't need them. My car should know every car in an X mile radius and if I need to stop, and I don't. So there are certain rules that are in place because we're, the human
Mhm.
condition. We need the stop signs. Well, it's debatable if we need them, but we use the stop signs just now because it may or may not stop crashes.
Mhm.
We shouldn't need that. So I think in time we'll use AI to threat model more and more, and it will be better at it than us. It will have access to more information. It will be able to synthesize more easily and recognize those patterns. I do think there will, for a long time, for probably maybe a couple of decades, be uh, space and use for humans within that loop. And I think what could happen, what's most likely to happen, if I'm going to base the future off the past, if we take humans out of the loop and things go wrong, we'll put a few more back in. I
Mhm.
don't think the industry looks like it does today. In 20 years, I think there's less humans involved and more AI and more AI agents, but there will always be physical threats. And so we will always have to mitigate against those. And to do that, most likely until robotics are ubiquitous, we're going to have to do that uh, with with people. And so I think the job moves a little bit over the
Mhm.
next decade or so.
And
Um,
people are already making a practice of social engineering AI, right? Like with these
yeah,
jailbreaks, or, I was fascinated with an interview that Amr, the CEO of Vectara, did with
yeah,
I can't remember, Maya was the AI I think he was interacting with, where he took it through a whole scenario of,
yeah,
I'm dying, can you help me, to this person has died and you have to
yeah,
testify in their trial. Like it was super
yeah,
fascinating to see how
yeah,
the technology responded, which because it's programmed on how we
yeah,
interact and how we see the world, then obviously it's still a very
yeah.
human-based response. So,
There's widespread adoption of something when it's cheaper and better, and sometimes just cheaper, and rarely ever just better. And so I think that as the price of using AI comes down, we will use it more and we'll find better use cases for it. And especially in this industry, I have wondered, what some of the big names in the industry in terms of like certifications will do. So
mhm.
if you're sitting like your OSCP now,
Does that work?
how are they
Yeah.
guarding against that? And it's
Mm.
sort of, maybe it doesn't matter, right? Maybe you cheat and you use ChatGPT to do it. And honestly, it's really hard, so I totally understand. Like, so maybe you use that, you've got the certification, you get the job, and you don't really need to know everything that would have been involved in the certification because you have ChatGPT. Maybe it's like that. I'm not saying I'm for or
Mhm.
against that. It's just maybe it's like that. And is that okay for the future? Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it will be, because we'd
Yeah.
be silly to not use these tools as
Totally.
enablers or augmenters of our knowledge. It
Yeah.
reminds me of the Neil Stephenson novel, The
Yeah.
Diamond Age, right? We have the kind
Yeah.
of the young lady's
Yes.
primer.
Yeah.
Um, that is kind of the guide. I feel like that with my ChatGPT subscription right now. Like it's my co-pilot for the day. I ask it
Yeah.
all sorts of questions,
Same.
and why do I need to retain that particular set of knowledge when I have a tool
Yeah.
that's so readily accessible?
Yeah.
And I think people make the argument with the internet as well. Well, it makes us stupider,
Yeah.
where I don't feel that that's the case. I feel like if used correctly, it actually makes us better because we can handle a
Huge.
larger scale of issues, and we can
Yeah.
operate with better information and better knowledge because
Yeah.
we are forgetful, we are
Yeah.
delusional, we are,
Yeah,
there
we
are
have.
elements of
Yeah.
our personality or traits, through evolution that we can help supplement with technology.
Yes,
So,
absolutely. who's it? Was it E.O. Wilson said we have like basically the technologies of gods, but we have the emotions of,
Yeah.
I'm gonna butcher it, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's an interest. Do I have that in that book?
Yeah, yeah,
Do I have that in that
yeah,
book?
it might be in there.
Oh
I have to
no.
check. I typically highlight the fun quotes, so I'll have to go back and check. Hey, be mindful of time. I really appreciate you
Yeah, thank you.
being on here, but I do have one last question, and you kind of know it's coming because we've
Yes,
talked previously about our mutual love for books. What is
yes.
a book that you have read, recently or even not recently that you would
Okay.
recommend that folks check out?
I cannot give you one, but I have a top five, and
Oh, okay,
they're
I'll take
generally
five.
always
Yeah,
I've gone
yeah.
top five. So, How the World Really Works by Vaclav Smil, Vaclav Smil. Loved that book. Very technical, but probably should be required reading for everyone. It kind of puts a lot of the things that we talk about in society where we don't have technical know-how, but we have opinions on it, puts those into perspective. Everything from renewables to the pillars of society,
Mm,
cement, steel, ammonia, whatever else he talks about in there. I loved that book.
mm,
Outlaw Ocean by Ian Urbana. Again, really difficult book to read, but kind of shows how unmanned the oceans are, what goes on out there, that actually men are the most enslaved people in the world because they're indentured on these fishing ships. They don't get paid. Sometimes they're like cuffed, like
mm,
handcuffed and stuff. So it's a crazy book. It has some happy chapters in it, like Sea Shepherd.
mm.
Prisoners of Geography by Tim Marshall, I thought was outstanding. It was written probably 12 or 15 years ago at this point, but very relevant for today. It explains kind of geopolitics through actual physical geography. Why
Mm.
Russia is doing what it's doing just now is sort of in there and was essentially predicted within that novel, within that book, and then other things like Pakistani and India, and just like
Mm,
here's the geography behind the uh, geopolitics. And then Chip Wars by Chris Miller is a
mm.
fantastic book, like really, really interesting for nerds, really, I would say. And then the other book that anybody could and should read is called Stuff Matters. And I'm trying to look at the author. It's Mark, and his second name's like Mayo
Yeah,
Damnick, I think.
I'll find it and I'll put links to all
Yes.
five of them. I love that you came up with five recommendations, and I've only read one
Yes.
of them, so that's
Which one
super
did you read?
rare. I read Chip War, and so
So good. Did you like it?
I did like it, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-mm-mm.
But now I
Mm.
look forward to reading the other four.
You
I'll add
and
them to the
tell me
set.
when you do,
I
everyone,
will.
and then also give me some recommendations because I've hit a little bit of a wall. I'm not enjoying what I've picked out, so let me
Okay,
know.
yeah, I will
Yeah.
send you. I do a top 10 every year, and then I put out
Cool.
a book recommendation every week in my newsletter. So I'll send you the link to both of
Subscribe.
those so you can check them
Yes,
out.
for
Yeah.
sure, for sure. On LinkedIn, I put every quarter, I put the books that I've read up and I
Oh, I
rate
love
them.
that. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We can swap. This
perfect.
is going to be fun. We're best
Yes,
friends.
we need yeah, we need like a Black Hat book club or something. Yeah,
Yeah, we do. Yes, I like it.
yeah,
Well,
perfect.
Jeff's the first one. I'm sure that man doesn't read. Do you think Jeff reads?
He
I'm gonna ask
does,
him.
yeah, because
He does?
he and I discuss books whenever we get together. Yeah, for certain.
Then
Yeah,
I'm gonna
yeah,
start annoying him about that.
yeah.
Okay,
Excellent.
great.
Well, thank you
Thank you
so
for having me.
much. Yes,
Thank
of
you.
course.
Thanks for listening to this OODA Loop production. For the latest analysis on cybersecurity, technology, and global risks, please visit www.oodaloop.com.